welcome to the Digital Transformation Lab at Cork University Business School. Today, we're delighted to welcome back Robin Speculand. The last time Robin was here, we talked about World's Best Bank, a strategic guide to digital transformation, a bestseller, an absolutely great read. But Robin has a new book, Implement, Doing It Right in a Digital World. So Robin, delighted that you are here.
You're supposed to also say a great read.
It is a great read. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Robin, why don't you tell the audience about yourself?
Sorry, thank you for that. It's an absolute delight to always do the podcast with you. And Implement is a work of passion. And the book has, just as you mentioned, come out. And what I do, you'll get in 2 seconds. Organization craft the strategy, and sometimes they use a third party, one of the big consultancy houses, and the big consultancy houses walk out and I walk in. So I'm a strategy and digital implementation specialist. I don't craft the strategy for you, but I make sure it gets implemented, not by doing it for you, but by guiding organizations through the journey. And why? Because customers notice your implementation, not your strategy. And the new book, Implement, is how do you go from that crafting to really impact all your key stakeholders.
Yeah, and Robin, I did read the book yesterday, and it is a great read. In fact, I'm amazed you packed so much into it, because it's like the 101 of strategy. Everything you could think of needs to be in there. But this whole issue of implementation, I mean, look, on one level, you talk about strategy being sexy and implementation not. But what is the real problem? Why do organizations struggle with implementation? Because you reference common sense, and it is common sense, great plan, but if you don't implement it, so what? So what is the problem?
So you're spot on, Tony. And the opening quote of the book, Implement, the opening quote is, knowing what to do and doing it is 2 different things. When you present this argument to any leader on a logical front, they will agree with you that it makes absolute sense to balance both your strategy and your implementation, but yet we don't. Now, let me give you an example. If you searched for strategy frameworks and tools, you of course come out with hundreds or thousands of pages, or ChatGPT with thousands of listings. When you do the same for implementation, very few. It's the same for, you'll find loads of strategy consultants, but very few implementation consultants. So this knowledge imbalance that exists today is part of the reason why leaders still pay more attention to strategy and they struggle with the implementation, because they haven't got the structure, the framework, and the tools to guide them through the journey, which is why I wrote Implement, to provide them that missing resources.
And Robin, on one level, it reminded me of that book many years ago, The Knowing Doing Gap, because it was sort of thinking, yeah, actually, Robin's right here. Look, they have the strategy, but how are we going to change the mindset where actually, yeah, the strategy is great, but yeah, we really need to make it work and work it hard, but also bring the people with us. So how are we going to get that mindset change into organizations? Because it doesn't exist today.
Oh, what a great question. You know, I mean, you and I have been friends and know each other many years now, and I've been researching implementation, and I live out in Singapore, which I didn't mention in the intro, originally from the UK, but Singapore is home, for 30 years now. And for 25 years, I've been researching the state of implementation. And every single survey we've done, one of the top 3 reasons why strategy implementation fails is poor communication. Now, leaders, again, they know what to do, but doing it is 2 different things. So to answer your question, how do you get the employees engaged? How do you get them involved in the implementation? This is one of the most critical questions that leaders are not asking enough. So I'm going to give you a couple of tools from the book at how you do this. The first one is, I call it strategy on a page, SOAP. Now, what's strategy on a page? Instead of presenting a big document, you take your strategy and you create it as a visual image on one page. Now, some companies use a house, some companies used a cake, others have used food item. Doesn't matter what it is. Well, it matters what it is, but what's important is that it resembles and reinforces the key message of your strategy and what you're looking to achieve, the outcome. Now, why is that so powerful? Because we know 7 out of 10 people learn visually. So now you have a succinct, clear image where everyone understands what the organization is looking to achieve. So a strategy on a page, excuse me, is one visual way of doing it. And I'll give you one more practical quick tool. Also in the book, I recommend using something like a cascade kit. Who do people listen to the most in their organization? Now, with all due respect to any
Well,
CEOs
they
who
don't
are
listen to the
listening,
board or the exec because they never meet them.
it's not the CEO who maybe they see once a quarter or once a year at the town hall meeting or Christmas party. It's their immediate boss.
Yeah.
So in a cascade kit, what happens is we start at the top, which is why we call it cascade, and the CEO briefs their one downs, who brief their one downs, who brief their one downs. So what is happening? Everyone in the organization is hearing about what the strategy is and what they need to do different from their immediate boss, who they listen to the most. And we set that up for success. So we give everyone a standard presentation so we have a succinct, coherent message. We give them the materials, an FAQ, where they can also a percentage of where they can ad lib. And then at the end, and this is the part I love the most, Tony, after you finish the cascade, which it doesn't matter how big an organization you are, you can do in 90 days, you can then go to your frontline employees and you can survey them to understand how important, what the strategy is and why it's important. And now you make the communication measurable. So the cascade kit plus the strategy on a page are two very powerful tools for translating the big picture strategy into the everyday lives of your employees.
Now, Robin, I want to delve into this a little bit because you mentioned in the book you get a few stats, and they're scary stats that actually most people have no idea what the strategy is. Even the people implementing the strategy at middle level don't necessarily understand the strategy. But you also talk about, yeah, it's around having the great big vision, but that doesn't relate to people in the line. You need to actually make it meaningful for them so they know what they're doing and how it is driving the strategy. So can you join those dots up for us, please?
Yeah, so the challenge we have is leaders craft a strategy. And of course, they're thinking big picture, as they should be. Okay. And the challenge we have is that the leaders are not good at explaining to employees what does that mean to their everyday work. And I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. But the challenge we have is that too many leaders don't make the time, effort, energy to translate the strategy into what's different from business as usual. Now, most of us have attended a town hall meeting. We've heard the brief from the CEO. We know from the results, this was published by Harvard, 88% of people who attend a town hall meeting walk out afterwards and go, well, that was fun and interesting, and go back to doing what they've always done, which is what? Working on the old strategy, doing their day-to-day work. Information doesn't change the behavior. So leaders need to follow up. First of all, they've got to translate the strategy into what it means to employees. Now, some of us are familiar with the term WIFM, what's in it for me? But there's another term I'd like to introduce called WEX-FM, what's expected from me? Now, the Cascade Kit's one tool to then explain the WEX-FM, but also leaders need to cascade down, and then the supervisors to the front line, helping people understand it from their own perspective. So whether you're working in operations, customer service, customer relationships, legal, HR, finance, every department understands how they're contributing and have a line of sight to the bigger picture. Now, that's easier said than done. I'll give you one more tool as an example. Measurement is so powerful in supporting this. Having the right measures in place also is a powerful tool for translating what we need to get done, because measures help us identify the right actions, and then making sure what we say gets done so we can track then whether we're getting the results.
Yeah, and I want to come back to measurement. I suppose there's one or two things I want to delve into, though, is, in my experience, Robin, the grand speech is wonderful. It's that people walk away and they start thinking about, well, what does this mean? Do I have a job? So what's in it for me, or what's it expected of me? So if we can't crack that nut, you're going to get suspicion. You're going to get all the cynicism. You're going to get all those things going on. So we really need to, and it brings me to another point, which is quite often what I find in organizations is actually they're setting out on, say, digital transformation, but they haven't defined what digital transformation is. So they can't cascade to start with, right? Because, even within the executive team, they all have a different impression of what it means. So if you can't get agreement around the top table in terms of, well, what actually is the strategy that we're trying to implement, you certainly can't cascade, and you certainly can't make it relevant for employees. Is that fair to say?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you and I both know that if we don't have alignment at the top, then everyone goes back to their country, department, division and communicates what they want to think, say, and feel, and not what the rest of the group is saying. And immediately you get disconnects and detachment rather than alignment. So 100%. So what's most critical, and a lot of the time when I'm working with the board and the leadership team, is we work on the strategy message. And we spend the time, and we have a client in a few weeks' time, just after the holidays in South Africa, with 350 of their regional leaders all coming together. And part of the 2 days is specifically assigned to what is the strategic message that all of us take back to our countries, departments, and divisions. And we have to have a coherent, consistent message that is communicated across the group. Now, the tools that you and I have already mentioned, plus there are other ways of making sure. So we have to test it and make sure the leaders are all saying this. And if we don't have that at the beginning, then it fails. And the other two I'm talking about, which I already mentioned, is the measurement, once again, when you have that corporate scorecard. So you're changing your strategy. And we haven't even touched on digital, and we'll come to that in a moment. But when you change your strategy, you must change your measures. I'll say that again. The rubric is change your strategy, you must change your measures. Why? Because otherwise you're measuring the old way of working.
And rewarding the old ways too.
Spot on, yes. And
but Robin, quite often though, organizations, they don't change the metrics. So, it's the grand speech about the strategy, and then they continue. And in fact, and at say a division level or an department level, they have a set of metrics that are actually driving people to do the opposite to what you want. Right? So this doesn't, I mean, back to your sense-making point, this isn't rocket science. I mean, if you know where you're trying to go and you can come up with the metrics and you can cascade them, but why doesn't that happen?
Because a lot of the time, well, to put it in a nutshell, leaders are not good at crafting scorecards.
Okay.
Getting your scorecard right is not easy. And now in a digital world, because the subtitle of the book is Doing It Right in a Digital World, we have a whole plethora of new measures that when you and I were only 20 years ago, we never looked at these. We never had to measure, for example, scalability or time to market or revenue from traditional versus digital customers. So not only are we not good at measures, we're increasing more measures, and data is becoming more essential. So the challenge is for the leadership team, it's got to be reflected. They've got to change the corporate scorecard, and they've got to make sure the right measures are driving the right behaviors. So it's not just about coming up with the measures, but are they driving the right behavior? Now, how do you know that? It's having the cadence reviewing the performance. So leaders are guilty of setting everything up. Here's our new strategy. Here's what we're going to measure. Here's what needs to get done. And then, Tony, it's almost like they turn their back and walk away.
Yeah.
Now, going back to your earlier point, when they don't change their measures, what message does that send to the employees? Well, they're not really serious about the strategy. So that's one of the challenges. When they do change them and then they don't follow up, it sends the same message. So it takes an effort and a discipline, which is what the first part of the book is all about. It takes discipline to do the right thing.
Now, you do talk in the book about, this evolving world, rapidly evolving world, and, the old command and control way of running organizations no longer being fit for purpose. But if you have leaders who are, let's say, they're not digital natives for sure, right? So they're grasping with all this digital. Take AI, take generative AI. 2 years ago, no one was talking about it. Today, everyone's talking about it. Who studied it on their course at university or whatever? No one. Right? So you have leaders who are grasping with, what's all this digital stuff, feeling a need to be in control. But that mindset no longer works. It's not about actually having all the answers. It's about trying to orchestrate that the organization can bring the answers through. So is there not a more fundamental issue that we need to deal with? Get leaders to accept that, look, you don't have to have the answers. You just need to, set up the guardrails and bring everyone on the journey. Let them come up with the answers.
Yeah, so you're spot on. And let me give you the problem first, and then some potential solutions for how it can change. The challenge we have is, what's the biggest bottleneck in a digital transformation? It's not technology, it's the senior leaders and their mindset. Now, with all due respect to senior leaders, some of them cross their arms and go, look, I've been in this company for 20 years. I'm a senior leader. I know how this company works. Who are you in jeans and a t-shirt to tell me what to do different? We have to recognize that with the way we led prior to the digital transformation doesn't work in a digital transformed company. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. The shift that is happening, and that I coin in the book, is going from vertical management to horizontal management. Now, what does that mean? Vertical management is what we're all familiar with. You have to go up the pipeline to get permission, to get sign-offs, to get approvals, to get budgets. You got to go to meetings, go to committees. And all our time is spent in the bureaucracy, chasing around, getting sign-offs, getting permissions. And we're burning so much time. Why is this important? Because in today's working in a digital world, speed is your competitive currency. So what we need to do is flatline the bureaucracy. Now, how do we do that? We call it horizontal management. Now, horizontal management is when we look end to end across the whole organization on the customer journey. So there are three critical components in horizontal management. The first one is that we're tremendously data-driven. The second part is, as I mentioned, we're doing end-to-end customer journeys. And the third is that employees are empowered to make the changes and take the right actions. Because the leaders, last one, so I'll just add on, the leaders don't drive digital transformation. They set the direction, but they're not the ones in the hackathon, the design thinkings, the journey mappings, the data translation. It's your employees. So by creating that horizontal management, we create the successful environment and culture that then drives the transformation that needs to happen for your business.
So Robin, on one level, it's very intuitive. Look, your people who are closest to the customers understand the problems and should be able to fix them better if they're empowered to do so. But what about this data point? Because organizations, despite the rhetoric, are not data driven. Right? Now, I know in Worldsmith Bank, you gave great examples of how DBS set up. It was like an airport control center, but that's not most organizations. They talk about being data driven, but in fact, it's all historical data they're using. They're not using data that runs their business. Right? So, is there not going to be a major shift required for us to be able to empower our people? Because if we don't have the data, we're back to command and control.
Well, there's a couple of critical things you touch on there. So let me just highlight them. One is on the data, how you set up the data. And I'll do that one first. And then the second one, which you're teasing the audience with, is then building that culture, psychological safety for people to make the changes. So let me take the first one on data. I would slightly disagree with you. I mean, you're over in Cork, Ireland. I'm over in Singapore in Asia. So we have different views of the world. But I'm seeing in Asia, a lot of companies are becoming more data driven. But I do see a difference between Europe and Asia. I fortunately just spoke again this year at the Peter Drucker Forum, which is held in Vienna. So I was able to hear a lot of what's happening in Europe. And it does seem there is a difference. But the point here is there are two types of companies that exist: those who are data driven and those that don't exist.
Right.
In other words, this is not optional. If you don't already have a data operating model, a DOM, in play, then you're going to be obsolete by the end of the decade. Why? Because we have to become data driven. Now, very quickly, there are 3 steps. The first step is uploading, as you just mentioned, your historical data. And that can take you, depending on your size, up to 2 or 3 years. It's not pleasant, it's ugly, but you have to get it done. The second step, which sometimes surprises leaders, it's not about using the data, it's about changing the mindset of your employees. Everyone knows, at a basic level at least, how to use a spreadsheet or look at data. But it's having the mindset that in a meeting, show me the data. Show me what supports the argument. The days of a customer rep coming in and going, I spoke to the customer yesterday, I know what they want, are gone. We don't rely on emotions on their own. It's got to be intuition and data balance. So the second step is the mindset. Now, a quick example of that is the smart companies eliminate PowerPoint presentations. Why? Because as soon as you put your data in a PowerPoint, it's already historic. And secondly, you don't want your employees wasting time preparing PowerPoints when we can use dashboards. And then the third, to finish it off, is becoming future ready. So what happens now is once you've got that data operating model with a single source of truth, where the leaders and employees have the confidence and the governance built in, there was a lot in that sentence.
Yeah.
Then you can build for a future ready for tomorrow. So the design and development of future products have data built in from the beginning. So that's on the data side. Or maybe I'll pause there and then we can talk about psychological safety further down, because data is a very critical element that you brought up quite rightly.
Yeah, and I'm interested in this. I mean, in some respects, and maybe the issue is, in Europe, there's a lot of older companies that maybe they didn't grow up on data, so therefore it's very hard to change the mindset. Asia, obviously, there's been a boom of new industries, new businesses, whatnot, and maybe they've got off to a better start. Right? But I do think you go into organizations, it's still the sort of financial control view of data. It's what happened 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. It's not what happened now. So it's not like your DBS aircraft control center where
Well,
they
if
can
I can
see the
give you
planes coming in and going.
if I can give you another example of that, you got to think how tech companies use data and how all other companies use it. So in a tech company, if you Google something or whatever platform you use to search, how long do you wait for a response? It's instant.
Yeah.
But when you go to your bank and you put an inquiry or you do a transaction, how long does it take? It can be up to half a day or even longer.
Mm.
And the problem is, it's the same person who's using the Google, the tech platform, who's using the bank. And today, every company has to think of themselves like a tech company. And you can't have that half a day. Those days are rapidly going. It's all about speed being your competitive currency.
Yeah. So let's delve into the psychological safety piece. And I know you talked about this in your last book as well, but you know, for organizations to innovate, they have to take risks. If they take risks, they're going to fail. But our command control structure doesn't tolerate failure, certainly in the West, right? So how do you break that cycle?
Not easily. um, so what I focus on in the book is, well, first of all, let me give you the shorter answer, which is leaders need to go, and you touched on this earlier in your introduction, from command and control to guiding and coaching. So an example of that is you go into a meeting as the leader and you tell people what to do. But today in a digital world, you go into a meeting to find out what's happening in your company. So you've got to change that mindset. You've got to be open and listening. The other critical thing I'll add to that is you're promoted because you know all the answers, but that's traditional. In a digital world, the leaders who are promoted are the ones who ask the right questions, inquisitive questions. So you want a leader now who probes, challenges, encourages. Now, when you have that mindset, you're open to people then starting to test things. Now, we all know that in a traditional world, failures were seen as a cost, as an expense, which is why they were punished. In a digital world, failures are seen as opportunities. But there are two underlying principles. The first one is that they have to be doing it for the right reasons. So we wanted to improve the process or make it faster for the customer, or it was urgent. The second one is they can't keep repeating the same mistakes. So they got to learn from their mistakes. But building a culture of psychological safety is once again a 2 to 3 year journey. Changing culture is the hardest thing when it comes to implementation. So of course it takes time.
Yeah. And Robin, you'd be glad to know I did have a Scottish CEO at one stage, and his phrase was breakthroughs are made with questions, not answers. So absolutely, it's a
Love
great
it.
way to think about it. Now, I wanted to pick up on a point in terms of asking the right questions, but you also talk about making the right actions, and you're not talking about big actions. You're talking about
Yeah.
loads of right little
Yeah.
actions. So maybe join up the right questions to drive the right micro actions.
Yes. So let me go back a step for those who haven't read the book, Implement. What is strategy? Well, there are many different definitions, but I'll give you my succinct one. Strategy is about making the right choices. So Cork University, you decide which students you want to focus on, which courses you're going to provide, which professors you're going to hire, what areas you want them to focus and teach on. So that's making a choice. Others for company, it's about which market we look at, which segment we want to target, what pricing, what products. So what is implementation? If strategy is making the right choices, implementation is about taking the right actions. Now, let me break that down for you, then I'll give you a couple of examples. Taking is a discipline. And as I said, the first half of the book provides why and how you need and how to get that discipline. The second half of the book then provides you the framework and tools. But taking is a discipline. We know what to do, but we don't do it. We all know we should live and eat healthy, but do we? We all know we should exercise 20 minutes a day, but most people don't. One more quick example. We all know that smoking is not good for you, but would you believe that medical research shows that 18% of doctors smoke? So knowing what to do and doing it is two different things. So that's on the taking. Now, what's the right actions? We're all busy every day. There's more actions than there is time in the day. But are you taking the right actions that are delivering the right outcomes? So the challenge for the leaders is to break down initially the strategy, especially at the start, and articulate what is different from business as usual in the small right actions. Now, why small? Because if you ask people to leap too far into the future, you're going to lose them. But taking small steps, we build momentum, and we build traction, and we get engagement.
Yeah, and if you get lots of people doing lots of small actions
There we
and are
go.
on
You
the
beat me
right
to my own
path,
line. So
yeah,
say that again, because I spoke over you. You were
no, no,
spot
no,
on.
no, no. It is fascinating because I think it is one of the challenges. I think organizations they talk about the grand strategy, which is fine for the board, but I can't relate to that. I can't get my arms around it. And if I can bring it down to, well, actually, here are the right actions, and it's back to actually those leaders prompting with the right questions based on data. They now have everyone focus on what are the right things they can do in their part of the world, because you do need to translate, or cascade is the word you use. But in the UK they've used this phrase of tone tone at the top, echo at the bottom, and engagement in the middle. So unless you can get that working, right, and back to what's expected of me, here's my little actions. They may seem insignificant, but actually they're not insignificant because they're part of many actions that are driving the strategy in the right direction.
And there lies the confusion, because we have so many actions, because we've also still got to do the old work as well as the new work, that's where confusion is. But let me give you one riddle, because I haven't given you any stories or riddles, not so many yet. And as you know, because you've been to the book, but every chapter starts with an implementation story.
Some
But
of them
here's
very
the
amusing
riddle.
stories.
So one of the riddles, just supporting what we're talking about, is 5 birds sit on a fence. 3 decide to leave. How many birds are left on the fence?
I know the answer because I read the book.
When I ask that question to leaders, I always get 0, 2, or 5. The right answer, as you know, is 5. Why 5? Well, they listened to a wonderful podcast about why they should move to the other side of the fence. They even had a conference call on the first Monday of every month discussing what to do to get to the other side of the fence, but they didn't take the right actions. So at the beginning, and this is critical, leaders help articulate what is different from business as usual, what are the small right actions, but they don't do that throughout the whole journey, because then they're still commanding and controlling. They have to shift to guide and coaching. And that links back to what we talked about earlier with the psychological safety. People will make mistakes, especially the first 6 months, where they're still trying to identify what does this mean to the new way of working, till the new way becomes the current business model. And leaders have to be there supporting, coaching, and guiding. And when things don't work, it's about saying, okay, what can we learn from this? What do we do different? And that's the critical role of leadership within a horizontal model.
Well, one of my favorite stories was the 8-second rule, and I won't ruin it for people that haven't read the book. But actually, the point was this was a rule that was there back from 1823, and everyone followed it blindly, but no one asked, but why?
It's like when a new employee joins the company and they have a fresh look and they say, but Tony, why do we do this? And somebody says,
we've always done it this way.
And they get shouted down.
So talk to me then in terms of, because underneath all this, really what you're talking about is being agile and agile at scale. So how do we get organizations to think and act in an agile way at scale that propels the strategy forward, or the implementation of the strategy forward?
Well, let's just do a clarification, because the word agile has got different meanings to different people. So for a take, they think waterfall to agile, and using DevOps or MLOps as an example. Where you and I are talking about, the phrase that's becoming more popular is agile at enterprise. And that's agile at scale, some people call it. But the important thing here is, in a digital world, you cannot be siloed. If you're siloed, you will fail. Just like if you're not data-driven, you won't exist by the end of the decade. Now, how can I say that? Because, well, I'll give you a real example. I was working with a client in Africa, and they called me in because they were having problems doing customer journey mapping. And immediately I found out the problem was that every department had its own goal and its own measures that were responsible to their own leaders. So when they came together to try and do a journey mapping, they were all focused on delivering what they had to do to keep their boss happy, and not the end-to-end customers throughout the journey. You need, and it goes back to our measurement as well, for your customer journey mapping, that unified goal and measure. And that's what then drives the right behavior. So if you're siloed, you have people competing. And in agile at enterprise, and this is a new way of working that's going to get a lot of popularity in the next few years. You heard it first on Tony's broadcast. It's going to become the default model for organizations. And what it does is it's the horizontal management. So we break down, we have now in the cloud, we have shared data. So we're not dependent on a department to share their data. We have, of course, the governance, who can see what and how it's used. But we have the shared data. We have collaboration. So people are working in squads that are cross-functional, and it brings them together. We're looking at the value for the end user, whether you're B2B or B2C. It's irrelevant, because data is closing that. You know, just because you're B2B doesn't mean you can no longer know what's happening with your end product. So we've eliminating that B2B and B2C gap. So now data is driving that. So we use the data, we break down the silos, we collaborate in cross-functional, and we look end-to-end across the customer. And, you know, some successful companies in Asia, there are two that have really led this. The Haier Group out of China, Haier, if you're not familiar with them, they're actually the biggest white product company in the world. Bigger, they actually, GE Electric tried to buy them, and then they ended up buying GE Electric. So, you know, tremendous success story. The other one you've been kind enough to mention is DBS has now restructured itself over the last 3 years and is also agile at the enterprise. So companies today, the top leading companies in the world, they're embracing this to break the silos, get collaboration, communication, and cooperation across the organization.
Now, can I throw in a challenge there? Because one of the things I see, Robin, is that when it comes to digital, organizations are nearly creating new silos, right? So there's the old business now, oh, there's the digital business. And that's counterintuitive to what we're talking about. And in fact, sets it up to fail because it's now competing with the old business for resources, time, energy, commitment, etc. So is this not an issue that organizations need to, back to your point, we're talking about the customer here. The customer doesn't care how we organize. We need to be focused on the customer. But are we not creating this problem now with organizations sort of, yeah, I mean, look at the jobs on LinkedIn, head of digital channels, head of digital products. You can say, but have you not just got customers?
Yeah, so you're spot on. And let us step back, because we haven't touched so much on the digital in our conversation. So maybe we can little step into it. I've been fortunate that since 2014, I've been a digital specialist helping traditional companies become digitally driven. So I work with the board and the leadership on guiding them through that journey. And what's the difference between success and unsuccessful? Well, there are many different elements, of course, but there's one critical one that I bring out in the book, which is successful companies articulate what we call the digital ambition. Now, what's a digital ambition? Well, the digital ambition articulates what does digital mean to your customers. Now, why is it so important to frame it this way? Because at the heart of digital transformation is not technology, even your employees or stakeholders, it's the customer. And you have to clearly understand why you're doing digital from the customer perspective.
Yeah.
Now, there are three questions. The second critical one is, what does it mean to your business model? So how do we restructure ourselves? So for example, the Haier Group said what's critical for our customer is zero distance, which meant zero distance from the customer feedback to the engineer. So to eliminate that, they flattened the whole company to 400 micro enterprises. So they restructured the whole business model. The third question is, what then needs to change internally to deliver that digital ambition? Now, what's critical is the order in which you ask the questions. The companies who struggle start by asking, what does digital mean to us internally? Should we be more efficient? How can we work faster? How do we get rid of bureaucracy? Then they say, how can we then improve our business model and then improve our offer to the customer? But when you have that inside out approach, you struggle, because you're not delivering the value to the most important stakeholder in digital, the end user. So when you start by asking, what does it mean to our customer, our model, and the way we work, that's the model for success. I was fortunate, some people may have seen, CNN just covered me saying this. They're broadcasting it at the moment in one of the conferences, TechCon festivals I did. And what's critical here is that the order is so important, but leaders need to take the time to articulate the digital ambition. I'll give you one quick example, Tony, if I may. And we've talked about DBS. They have a lovely digital ambition that just exemplifies this. Theirs is making banking joyful. Now, first of all, nobody associates the word joyful with banking. So that's already, like.
Unless you've read your book, of course, which is a great read about this whole thing. Yeah.
So the whole point was that technology could take the pain out of banking. And those three words, making banking joyful, every single employee, 40,000 employees, all understand their job is to make banking joyful for whoever their customer is. Even if you're internal, as a support function, your customer is your colleagues. So whoever it is to make banking, and that drove their transformation in 4 years from a local bank to the world's best. So a digital ambition, when you get it right, is very powerful.
Now, I'm particularly interested in that the order that you talked there, starting with the customer, because if we work on the premise that most people in an organization want to do right by their customer, now they can understand why this is important, and they can start to understand what's in it for them in terms of delivering better for the customer, having a better experience themselves. Whereas if you just start over here at some sort of corporate goals, well, yeah, okay, yeah, but it doesn't do it for me. So that's one point. And the other point is around resistance. So that, I thought Maverick was in Top Gun, but you talk about four types of people, and you actually talk about I think what you call the Maverick Network or something. So
yeah,
maybe just join up in terms of making it easy for the employees or the people in the organization to grasp the nettle, but also then how to deal with resistance to make sure that it's the organization is coming on board. Because if the organization doesn't come on board, it doesn't matter how good your strategy is or how hard you work to implement it, it will fail.
Yeah. So without people engagement, you will fail. So the critical element is that not only, previously implementing strategy was already tough. But now implementing your strategy or implementing a digital transformation is even tougher. Why? Well, you and I both know that, digital transformation is about 10 years old. Prior to that, like, for example, if you did a technology project, we knew many of them failed, on average, 2 out of 3. Also, if you try to change your company culture, as I said earlier, is the hardest thing to change in implementation. What is digital transformation? We're taking tech, we're taking culture, putting them in the same pot and expecting a different outcome. It's crazy, okay? So we're taking two of the hardest parts, we're putting them together. We got to appreciate then that to help our employees get engaged, first of all, the digital ambition articulates the why, but not the how. So what's desperately missing is to provide your people the tools, the techniques to set them up for success. Now, let's start with the leaders. Many of our leaders, when we were studying, we didn't learn coding. There was certainly nothing called Python or AI or Gen AI when most of us leaders
internet. We didn't even have the internet.
So one of the popular tools is called reverse mentoring. Reverse mentoring is when you're sitting in a meeting, as we call it in Asia, losing face, losing respect. When you're sitting in a meeting, you're confused because you know what people are talking about. It's a loss of face. So to overcome this and to educate our leaders, a popular tool, which I talk about in the book, is for your employees who are specialists. Maybe they do Python or HTML, or they do the algorithm, for the algorithm coding. Maybe they run a hackathon. Maybe they're a design thinking facilitator. They train their boss in this specialized skill. So it's recognizing that your employees have the skill set and they teach you. Now, there's a lot of benefit. First of all, for the leader, they get the education they need. But secondly, it fosters that bonding and relationship where employees get to understand, meet, and know their bosses better. So it's a win-win across the organization. So that's
Yeah.
one part. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, they also get to understand the business and the risks and the
Yes.
ambition and
And
everything
from
else.
that
So
leader's
it's
perspective. Yeah.
yeah. Robin, I'm conscious of time because I know you have a meeting coming up, but I wanted to just talk about the role of check-ins because I remember reading at one stage about the Navy SEAL team when they come back from a mission, it's no one is in command, but they all talk about what went well and what didn't go well and what they could do better. Now, when I was reading your book and the role of check-ins, and you're sort of saying, yeah, but organizations don't actually check in. And sure, if they never check in on how they're doing on implementation, well, sure, how do they know what they're doing or where they're going or if it's working? So maybe talk a little bit about check-ins and
With
you know
pleasure.
why organizations don't do it and why they should do it and what they need to do to actually start getting this going as a way of thinking.
Well, maybe we go back a step and just explain what the check-in is and why it's so critical. We talked earlier about the agile approach, agile enterprise, and this is part of the methodology. Instead of waiting 6 months or a year to see if we're getting the result, we need a more frequent review cadence. We all know that we've never worked this fast and we'll never work this slowly ever again. So we're constantly doing more and more every day, every week. So the purpose of check-ins is to make sure that we're on the right path, making minor changes and adjustments along the way, rather than letting small problems snowball into big problems. So the check-in methodology, there's a couple of important concepts to it. First of all, it's short and sweet. It's not, let's hold a 2-hour meeting for the whole department and go around everyone and hear. It's
Hold them
10,
to account.
15 minutes, at most 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Second, one of the best practices is do it standing up. People speak a lot faster, a lot quicker when they're all standing. So keep it short, do it while you're standing. Now, what are you asking? The big difference between a check-in and previous style meetings is a check-in looks forward as opposed to a review that looks backwards. Now, what does that mean? If Tony was doing a check-in for me, he would say, Robin, I've asked you to do this part of the project. Where do you need support? What is working? What is not? What are you doing next? What are you expecting to see? So the questions from the leader are orientated to supporting you going forward. And it supports this coaching and guiding rather than telling and commanding. So critical component, you're looking forward. They're short and sweet, standing up, maximum 20 minutes. Okay, so that's the power of check-ins. They allow you to make small adjustments along the way. In implementation, Tony, nobody knows the journey ahead. So how do we know if we're getting the right results? So we got to keep checking in, making sure what we're doing is working, the right actions are driving the right outcomes, and we track that through the reviews and the measures.
Yeah, it's really back to those right questions, so your leaders are asking those right questions to help people on the journey.
Forward-looking
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, fantastic.
Big difference in our style.
Robin, I know you have to go. It is a great read. Is there any key message that you want to leave with us in terms of the book? I
I
would
love you
encourage
asking that.
everyone to
Thank
read
you
it.
for asking that. Yeah, so I've mentioned it, but I want to reinforce it. There's an imbalance today between strategy and implementation, where we started off by saying leaders still spend too much time on the strategy and not enough time, effort, and energy on the implementation. To this day, only 1 out of 3 implementations are successful, and only 1 out of 8 of those successes deliver long-term sustained value. What does it take to be different? Well, first part of the book talks about the discipline. Knowing what to do and doing it is 2 different things. So not just about having the know-how. I wrote implement because I wanted to provide leaders with the how-to. So it's not about why implementation is important, it's how to implement it. The second part of the book is what's often missing is the tools, the techniques, and the models. So you're going to find various models, such as the ticking clock model, which shows you the 11 operational steps for transforming from traditional to being digitally driven. You're going to come across in the second part of the book, the implementation compass, which highlights the 8 areas for excellence in implementation. And every chapter has got the stories, examples, use cases, case studies that make the whole book come alive for you, the reader.
Excellent. Well, Robin, it is a great read. And as I said at the start, I don't know how you pack so much into it. So well done on that. And I want to thank you for being here today, because I know your
It's
schedule,
always a delight.
I know your
Thank you
schedule
for
is
that
very busy.
opportunity.
No, no, our pleasure. I know your schedule is very busy, so I want to thank you. I want to thank the Digital Transformation Lab. I want to thank Cork University Business School for all their support,
Likewise.
and I want to thank our audience, because we do it for them, and it's sessions like this, Robin, that really help and make a difference. So thank you so much.
And thank you for your great questions. And I wish everyone all the best in implementing their strategies in the year ahead.